Welcome to Nurse Educators Now, a podcast brought to you by Collaborative Momentum Consulting. Our guest is Dr. Diane Saleska. She is a teaching professor at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. She also is a nurse legal consultant and advises attorneys regarding nursing issues. So her mix of both nursing and legal expertise, I think, will provide us with some interesting information regarding how to help our students navigate the legal aspects of nursing and healthcare. Thank you, Diane, for being with us. Let's just jump right in here. To begin with, what led you to being interested in the legal aspects of nursing practice?
Sure. And thank you so much for having me. So a number of years ago, I was the coordinator for our Nursing Skills and Simulation Center, and a lady had called and she had asked for demonstratives for a legal case that she was helping attorneys with. So demonstratives are items that you would need to bring to court to help the jury understand standard of care a little bit better. And I thought that sounded really intriguing. And I said, wow, that sounds kind of intriguing. And I said, how did you get into that? And she shared a few things with me. And she said, would you be interested in doing something like that? And I said, sure. I didn't give it another thought. And several months later, I got a phone call from an attorney in Florida asking me to review a case. I quickly learned that I didn't know a whole lot about tort law, so I had to dig in and figure things out. And once I was there was really no turning back. I developed several courses, one for the traditional undergraduate program, one for our RN to BSN program for completion students on the legal and ethical implications of nursing practice. And I continue to teach both of those today. I still receive requests from attorneys across the country to review cases for them. I don't advertise. I don't know how they get my name. And when I ask them, they'd say, we'd rather not tell you. So I take about 1 or 2 cases a year.
Well, that's really interesting and very exciting. I can see how you would enjoy doing that. You mentioned standard of care, and that seems to be a foundational concept for understanding nurses' legal risk. Would you give us an example of a situation a novice nurse might encounter that puts the standard of care into question? And then related to that, would you recommend strategies that you might use to teach this concept? Sounds like you do that a lot.
I do. So I found over the years that students and nurses actually don't really fully understand the term standard of care. It is not the standards of nursing practice. It is not the standards of professional performance or the code of ethics. Standard of care, by definition, and this is what an attorney will tell you, is what a reasonably prudent nurse would do in the same or similar situation. And really, standard of care is based on evidence-based practice, facility policy, what's being taught in the nursing schools, expert opinions, and available literature. So here's an example I can throw out there for you. A novice nurse, and I see experienced nurses do the same. Let's say she has orders to give gentamicin IV piggyback. This patient has a running IV, peripheral IV, seems to be infusing without difficulty. The novice nurse hangs that gent piggyback without checking placement. The gentamicin infiltrates, causes extravasation, damages the patient's nerves and tendons. Now we've got a permanent injury, all because she didn't follow standard of care, which is checking placement prior to any IV piggyback, any IV push, even if you have a running IV. And what nurses will say, well, if the IV is running, of course it's not infiltrated. You don't know that. That's a violation in standard of care. Standard of care is in contrast to standards of nursing practice. This is really the nursing process, assessment, planning, implementation, evaluation. That's the standards of nursing practice. It's what we do. The standard of care is how we do it. I always emphasize the adverse outcome when not following that standard, reminding students that they owe the patient a duty. This is what the attorney will say. What is the duty that they owe? To follow standard of care. If you don't know, you have to ask. Inexperience is not a legal defense. The attorney will say to you, well, you either knew or you should have known. There's no wiggling out of that. So I recommend that all novice nurses and experienced nurses do these 4 things. Number 1, ask questions. Number 2, seek supervision if you are uncertain. Follow policy strictly and escalate your concerns promptly.
I'm sure I have seen situations much like that. And I would guess that nursing students get pretty scared when you start talking about that. What teaching learning strategies have you used to try to teach this concept in, say, class or lab or, that kind of
Sure.
thing?
The teaching learning strategies that I use typically is I will develop some case study scenarios. I'll create a short, realistic scenario and ask students to classify this particular incident as either a criminal offense or a civil offense, because we talk a lot about criminal law versus civil law. Civil law is where it's going to hit the nurse. This is what we call tort law. Anyway, I'll develop that case study and then we discuss the violation of the law versus of standard of care. Here's an example. A nurse diverts an opioid and the patient experiences uncontrolled pain. Well, is this a criminal offense? Yeah, because it involves theft of a controlled substance. You can't do that. That's against the law. This is a crime. Is it a civil tort? Yes, it involves harm to the patient. You were not able to provide adequate pain management for this particular patient. And let's say as a result, patient doesn't become active, develops pneumonia, and then they tie that lack of pain management to development of pneumonia. And now you've got an injury. Also, I will let them know that the state board is going to take notice of that too. Another strategy that I use is I can provide an actual nursing negligence case. I never share any of the cases that I'm directly involved with, just because I think that's a violation of confidentiality with the attorneys that I'm working for. But what I will do is I can look up different nursing negligence cases and I assign a case to a student group. And they will work to present this case in sort of a creative format. Maybe they'll do a courtroom scene, or maybe like Law and Order, Judge Judy, something like that, to make it fun. But they have to identify the duty that was owed, the breach in the duty, the injury that occurred, and the causation. And they'll also look at the actual case judgment and determine if they agree or disagree with how that was adjudicated. There's a publication out there, and I want to recommend this to all of you, it's called Legal Eagle Eye. Legal Eagle Eye. It's a monthly publication and it identifies recent nursing negligence and malpractice cases, the results of those cases, and then the settlements. It's a great read. These are very short, brief summaries of cases, but it really helps us to understand what's getting nurses into trouble and what's keeping them safe.
I didn't know such existed, but it would be a wonderful resource if you were teaching a legal component of a course. So thank you very much for sharing that. I didn't know that either. Would you describe the differences in helping students differentiate between criminal, civil, and then the Board of Nursing action? You've given us an example and that was great, but it's been my experience that students tend to get confused about all that, and maybe it's because they don't think about it in those kind of terms. But could you give us some example of how you might help students differentiate between those?
And we talk about this, the classes that I teach, but criminal law deals with actions that are considered offenses against society, things that you're not allowed to do because those actions hurt society as a whole. So for example, murder hurts society as a whole. So it's going to be the state of Missouri versus Saleska. So it's a criminal offense. I want to make this point because I think this is really important. Nurses are rarely, if ever, criminally charged. There was one most recent case that happened at Vanderbilt University Hospital where a nurse overrode the Pyxis and she removed vecuronium, which is a paralytic drug. She gave it to the patient when the order was actually for Versed, just to keep a person calm in the CT scanner. And because she gave vecuronium, the patient went into respiratory arrest and passed. And because her actions were so egregious, this was criminally prosecuted. Some other examples of criminal prosecution that may occur in nursing is, as I mentioned before, medication diversion. If you are stealing narcotics, stealing is a violation of criminal law. Patient abuse or assault and battery, that's a criminal offense. Falsifying medical records is criminal. Practicing without a license is criminal. Gross criminal negligence that results in death. So, for example, the case that I just gave. So those are some examples of criminal. Civil law, as I mentioned, this is where it kind of hits the nurse, focuses on private disputes between an individual and an injured party. What you did or failed to do causes an injury to another person. And this is what we call tort law. Torts For nursing negligence and malpractice, there are three different types. One is a non-intentional. This is just you had a lapse in judgment, you made a careless mistake. Falls, medication errors, falls under non-intentional. Quasi-intentional is when the action, there's a little bit more intent to harm, maybe violate patients' rights. An example of a quasi-intentional tort is a breach of privacy, defamation of character, failing to protect patients' information. And then lastly is the intentional tort. This is where it's willful, a nurse that violates a patient's rights. So for example, you give a sleeper at 4:00 in the afternoon because you don't want to be bothered by that patient. You intentionally did that. And maybe some harm results. Maybe they fall because they try and get up to the bathroom, something like that. Yeah, so those are the difference. Outcome for torts are usually monetary compensation. The state board may come in and revoke or suspend a license as well. Some examples of torts would be medication errors, failure to assess or reassess, failure to monitor, failure to communicate, and improper documentation, failure to follow policy, not seeking help, performing skills beyond your competence level, and improper delegation and supervision of that delegated task. The state board's going to be notified whether it is a criminal offense or a tort offense. And there are 4 levels of discipline by the state board. Public censure, where they publish your name in a newspaper article. Probation. You can still practice when your license is on probation. They may suspend your license. You may no longer work, and they may make you do something like go to drug rehab or take some additional classes. And the final level of discipline is revocation of your license. And that's when they take it away and you won't get it back. One other thing I wanted to mention when we talk about tort law is the high-risk nursing areas to be aware of: the emergency department, the ICU, labor and delivery, and pediatrics. When things go wrong in those areas, they go wrong fast and they go wrong severely. A couple of other areas we know is behavioral health because of the unpredictability, long-term health care because of the isolation that those elderly folks have, and then home health care because you're out there on your own and it becomes a he said, she said kind of an event.
When some of these occur, is it the attorneys that notify the board, or how does the board keep up with that?
That's a great question, and I don't know that I can answer that with 100% certainty. I imagine those things come out when you renew your license. And every time you renew, they ask that question: have you been involved in a lawsuit? Have you had a driving violation? All of those kinds of things. So I know for certain that's how they would find out. I also do know that hospitals will report egregious behavior or risky behavior kinds of things. I do know that the state boards look at social media and they find out a variety of things looking at social media posts. But I have never asked an attorney, do you report that to the board? So I cannot answer that with 100% degree of certainty.
Well, I think you have answered it. As our last question, let's assume that you have graduating nursing students. Are there some do's and don'ts that you sort of in their last class as they're walking out the door that you might want to emphasize so that they'll have it in their heads that things that they should do to remain free from legal harm? And I think in today's world, we're more litigious than ever before. So I think it's probably very important in today's world.
So yeah, I share these things with my students all of the time. So first of all, I just want to say the risk of being sued in a criminal court is extremely rare for nurses. The risk of being sued or named in a civil tort case is unlikely, but it is not rare for those reasons that you just mentioned. And what I want to say is, interestingly enough, the research indicates that if a patient feels cared for, even if there are negative events, they're not likely to sue. Most lawsuits name nurses, and they are triggered by patients that feel unsafe, ignored, or disrespected. So I tell my students, make sure that patient feels cared for. That's why you went into nursing in the first place, right? So follow through. The other things that I would just like to highlight is communicate like it matters, because it does. So introduce yourself to your patient each and every shift. Let them know when you're leaving. Listen to your patient without interrupting. Be honest about delays. Document defensively. So always include in your notes, specifically when you call the provider, who did you call? When did you call them? What did you tell them? And what was that response? Don't just say provider notified, orders received. When an attorney looks at that, it tells us nothing. And that's a real frustration for me when I'm reviewing notes. In terms of documentation, to never alter or backdate your notes. Write your notes like an attorney will read it, because one day they might. Follow your policy, your standards, and your scope. Stay within that scope of practice. Use your checklist for any high-risk tasks. Escalate early and clearly. Trust your judgment. If something feels wrong, escalate. Use your chain of command. You've got a charge nurse, you've got a unit manager, you've got a CNO. Take that up the chain of command. If you're not getting the response that you need from providers, escalate. Document that escalation and the outcomes. Advocate for your patient, even when it's uncomfortable for you. Many lawsuits hinge on failure to escalate, not the original problem, but the fact that you did nothing about it. Last thing I will say is manage your medications meticulously. Don't allow yourself to be interrupted. I think hospitals are doing a great job now. They're actually putting caution tape around the Pyxis. It says, do not disturb while you're in that.
Or wearing out some kind of outfit or color.
Put your yellow vest on, right? So medications is a high alert area. Stay professional under stress. Don't argue with family members. Build rapport. This is a huge one. As I mentioned before, if patients feel cared for, they're not going to sue you because they know that you're busy. They know that you're trying really hard. Yeah, I think, one last thing too, carry your own private nursing negligence insurance. Because here's one thing people don't realize is when you're working in a hospital, you are covered by their insurance. However, if your behavior is egregious and you violate standard of care, they will turn around and sue your pants off to recover their damages. We call this indemnification. So having that private insurance is going to help you. And also as a nurse, we volunteer all day long. Your hospital liability insurance will not cover you in a voluntary role, and you can still be negligent in a volunteer role. So private insurance, and people think, it's going to be really expensive. I tell my students, you spend more on coffee in a year than what your policy is going to cost you. Mine this year, I think, was $140 for the year. So that's really nothing. But bottom line is just care for your people. That's your biggest defense.
I think that is wonderful advice, and we need to remember that always. I've had some experiences in my career where, things went awry. And if you say, I am so sorry, here's what we can do to fix it. And don't go into why it went wrong. Just we'll do whatever we can to fix it. And it has worked well. And I think it really speaks to what the nurse is all about.
So to remember too, even with the best of care, things are going to happen in the hospital. They just will. It's what you do about it afterwards that's going to really protect you in the long run.
Well, thank you so much. This has been very interesting, and I'm sure that our folks that are listening to our podcast will get a lot of things that they can use with their students. So thank you very much. We appreciate it, and we look forward to hearing from you again.
All right. Thank you so much, Susie. Appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning in to Nurse Educators Now. Please subscribe to the show and share it with a colleague. For more free nursing education content or to book a consultation, visit us at collaborativemomentum.com. We'll be back soon with more conversations to support, challenge, and inspire you.